Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're pulling back the curtain on something that's always fascinated me.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, this question of how much of history, those really big decisions, the ones shaping nations, redrawing maps, how much of that is actually driven not by the famous faces we see, but by these, well, influential networks, groups operating sort of behind the scenes.
Ah, yes. That's a really compelling thought, isn't it?
Right.
And it's precisely what we're exploring today. We're taking a deep look into, well, a fascinating and maybe sometimes unsettling network known as the Milner Group and its associates.
Exactly. And our main source for this deep dive is Carroll Quigley's huge work, The Anglo-American Establishment.
A massive piece of research.
Totally. He really peeled back the layers, showing how this powerful, incredibly interconnected web of individuals stretching from, the late 19th century right through the mid-20th.
That's the period, yeah.
How they profoundly influenced British policy, global affairs. I mean, it's quite something.
It really is.
So our mission today is basically to pull out the most important insights from this, really intricate history, give you a kind of shortcut to understanding this hidden influence.
And hopefully spark a few aha moments along the way.
Yeah.
Think of it like a historical intelligence briefing.
Ooh, I like that.
We'll show you how power, these deeply held ideas, and, crucially, this network of relationships, how they can shape the world in ways you just don't always see on the surface.
Okay, let's do it. Let's start at the very beginning then. There's this foundational figure, Cecil Rhodes.
Right, Rhodes. Can't talk about this without him.
And he had this, audacious vision, didn't he? For something he actually called a secret society. What was that about?
Audacious is definitely the word. I mean, Quigley tells us that as early as 1875, Rhodes' ambition was exactly that, create a secret society.
Really? That early?
Yep. And he explicitly patterned it on the Jesuits.
Wow.
The AIM, a worldwide group, basically, of Anglo-Saxon sympathizers. And he considered this, according to the source, the essential core of his entire plan.
The core.
Yeah, the absolute heart of it. A vision he apparently held right up until he died.
So this wasn't just some, fleeting idea he had.
Not at all.
Quigley says this secret society was actually established.
It was.
And Lord Milner used Rhodes' money to finance it.
That's the connection.
Mm-hmm.
So after Rhodes died in 1902, well, things shifted a bit.
How so? How did it transform?
Well, with Rhodes gone,
Mm-hmm.
and another key early figure, W.T. Stead, his influence had already diminished a few years before. Lord Milner stepped in and significantly modified it, expanded it, really.
Okay.
So it transitioned from what people call the Rhodes Secret Society into the Milner Group.
Ah, okay. Different name, different structure, maybe?
Yeah, different organization, different character in some ways, but, and this is key, it rigorously pursued the same fundamental imperial goals, just, with Milner's strategic mind guiding it.
So who are some of the other key players in this this evolving network, and where did these important people actually meet? Sounds quite underground.
Well, underground might be a stretch, but definitely discreet. Over time, the leadership included Milner, of course, but also figures like Lord Selborne, Field Marshal Jan Smuts, we'll talk more about him later, I'm sure.
Okay.
Lord Lothian, Lord Brand, a significant group. And their meetings, they happened in all sorts of places.
Like where?
Across the British dominions, starting in South Africa around 1903. But also, crucially, in London, 1075 Piccadilly gets mentioned.
Right.
Oxford colleges were vital hubs, especially All Souls.
All Souls, okay. That name comes up a lot.
It does. And also, those classic English country houses,
Yeah.
like Cliveden, it shows how embedded they were within the existing establishment.
That's quite a spread for a supposedly secret group, isn't it? So what was the driving force? What was the justification behind it all?
Good question. The early group, so Milner, Stead, Rhodes, they justified the British Empire's existence mainly on moral grounds.
Moral grounds, not economic or political.
Primarily moral, according to Quigley.
Yeah.
They argued for things like self-government and federation within the empire.
Interesting.
And this vision was deeply influenced by the ideas of a thinker named Arnold Toynbee.
Ah, Toynbee.
Yeah. At its core was this conviction that the British Empire represented, and this is a quote, the unfolding of a great moral idea.
Freedom.
Freedom, exactly. And tied to that was a really strong sense of duty, duty to serve the state. It was quite an idealistic framework, almost utopian in a way.
Okay, so we've got the evolution from Rhodes to Milner, the key players, the locations, this kind of moral underpinning. But you mentioned earlier the real power came from its interconnectedness.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just the Milner Group operating in a vacuum. It it meshed with something called the Cecil Bloc. How did that work? How did they amplify each other?
That's a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Milner Group, on its own, probably wouldn't have achieved the power it did.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, many members, when they first joined, didn't actually have that much political clout themselves. Their power was massively amplified by these existing connections,
Yeah.
especially the Cecil family.
Ah, the Cecils.
Yeah,
Big name in British politics.
huge. And allied families, too, like the Littletons.
Hmm.
Quigley specifically points to Lord Salisbury, who was prime minister for a long time, and his, well, what Quigley calls extensive nepotism.
Nepotism.
Yeah, filling key government jobs between, say, 1895 and 1905 with his relatives and protégés.
Okay.
And this essentially gave the Milner Group, which was just forming, a ready-made power base
Yeah.
right inside the establishment. They could tap into that network.
Wow. So they had the network, but how did they actually use that influence? How did they exert it? It seems like they had this incredible, almost chilling grip on, well, on everything from universities to the press.
It's fascinating, the mechanics of it. They had a multi-pronged approach, almost systemic.
Okay, break it down for us. Academia first.
Right, academia. Quigley states the group became the most powerful single influence in Oxford's All Souls, Balliol, and New Colleges for a whole generation.
Most powerful.
That's the claim. And All Souls, in particular, seems to have been like a direct pipeline into public life.
A pipeline.
Yeah. One fellow there, a Bishop Herbert Hensley Henson, apparently said his own career success was mainly due to getting elected to All Souls.
Oh.
And their influence was especially strong, apparently, in appointing these non-competitive fellowships. That let them shape the college's direction, its policies from the inside out.
Okay, so a tight grip on elite academia. What about the media? You mentioned the Times.
Ah, yes. The Times. They controlled it for over 50 years with just one short, like 3-year gap.
50 years. That's incredible.
It is. But here's the interesting thing. The Times didn't have massive circulation back then, only about 35,000 at the turn of the century. It grew later, sure, but even by 1936, it was under 200,000.
So it wasn't about reaching the masses.
Exactly. Its influence wasn't about mass appeal. It was about shaping the opinions of, and Quigley calls them, a small group of important people.
The elite.
The elite, the decision makers. The paper was seen by many insiders as basically one of several branches of a single group, reinforcing the group's policies across different platforms. There was even this critical nickname for the Times,
Go on.
the All Souls Parish Magazine.
Get out. A parish magazine. That says it all, doesn't it?
It really does. Ties it right back to that academic elite. You can just picture those conversations, can't you?
Overport at All Souls, planning the next day's editorial.
Precisely. And their media strategy didn't stop with the Times. They founded other publications too. The State in South Africa back in 1908. And maybe most importantly, the Round Table in 1910.
The Round Table. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it remained the group's really consistent mouthpiece. And often, articles were published anonymously.
Anonymous.
Quigley suggests it was to give contributors greater independence and freedom. Float ideas, test the waters, without direct personal accountability.
Color.
And then they also founded the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the RIIA, or Chatham House in 1919.
Chatham House. Okay. Still very influential today.
Absolutely. And Quigley describes it bluntly as nothing but the Milner Group writ large, its widest public face, in a way.
So this idea of membership in a group like this, it sounds fascinating. Was it like you got a membership card, or was it more fluid?
Much more fluid, it seems. Quigley clarifies that membership wasn't a fixed thing. You could possess it in varying degrees, and it could change over time.
So an inner circle, maybe.
Exactly. An inner core reserved for those who were at the real secret meetings, like Milner and Rhodes themselves. But others, figures like Lord Halifax or Sir Alfred Zimmern, they might drift.
Drift.
Yeah, move between the inner and outer circles depending on the issue or the period. It reflected how influence and involvement could shift. It was less about a formal list, more about this shared network and, ideological alignment.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've seen how they built this network, how they influence things through academia and media. Where did we first see this really put into practice? Let's go back to South Africa. You mentioned Milner's kindergarten.
Right, South Africa is a key testing ground. The kindergarten, these were younger men Milner brought out, like Brand, Kerr, who later became Lord Lothian, Dawson, editor of the Times, Hitchens.
Okay, the next generation, sort of.
Exactly. After the Second Boer War, they focused intensely on building up the administration, the judicial system, the economy in the conquered territory.
Rebuilding, essentially.
Rebuilding, but with a specific goal.
Yeah.
By 1905, they were actively pushing for a closer union of the separate South African colonies. Unification. And here's a crucial insight from Quigley. Their control over the Transvaal was key.
Why the Transvaal?
Gold and diamonds. It gave them massive economic leverage to basically compel the other, poorer colonies to join the Union.
Ah, the money talks.
It certainly helped. And they didn't just rely on economics. They set up propaganda groups called Closer Union Societies. And they controlled influential newspapers like the Johannesburg Star and the State, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
That one was actually financed by A. Bailey, a Rand millionaire close to the group.
So a coordinated push, economic pressure, propaganda, media control.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, what about Jan Smuts? You mentioned him. He seems like such a paradox. Quigley describes him as an Anglophobe, fiercely anti-British at first.
He absolutely was a very vocal critic of Rhodes, very critical of the British after the Jameson Raid fiasco.
Right.
And quickly notes his violent and frequently unfair attacks on Milner himself.
Yet later, he becomes this close cooperator. How does that happen?
It's a fascinating example of the group's pragmatism, perhaps. Once the British granted self-government to the former Boer republics in 1906, Smuts became colonial secretary and minister of education in the Transvaal. And suddenly he's working in closest cooperation with the very kindergarten members he used to attack, all pushing for a united South Africa.
So what changed?
Quigley offers this really interesting explanation. He says Smuts was, quote, pro-Boer on all prominent and non-essential matters, but pro-British on all unobtrusive and essential matters.
Wow, that's quite a statement. Pro-British on the essential matters.
That's the argument. He apparently dominated the Transvaal delegation at the big national convention in 1908-1909, the one that created the Union of South Africa. And he pushed through the kindergarten's key projects.
So a masterclass in co-option, maybe?
Yeah.
Or just shared goals emerging?
Maybe a bit of both. It certainly shows how political alliances could shift when strategic interests aligned.
Okay. Moving beyond South Africa, then. The group's influence wasn't just there. What about India? Their approach seems quite different there.
Very different, but equally impactful, yes. Figures like Lionel Curtis, who Quigley notes had this uncanny knack for predicting future imperial policy, were key here.
Curtis, okay.
Curtis and others pushed for Indian self-government. Now, this sounds counterintuitive, maybe?
Yeah, giving power away.
But they genuinely believed it would actually bind India closer to Britain in the long run, not push it away. A sort of evolution of empire.
A different model.
Exactly. And this vision led directly to the Government of India Act of 1919. Quigley actually states the Milner Group was the chief factor behind the big 1917 declaration promising responsible government for India.
The chief factor. So they were driving this policy.
That's the claim in the source, yes.
So what were the key features of this India policy? It sounds progressive on the surface, but I sense there were controversies.
Oh, definitely controversies. The 1919 Act introduced this principle called diarchy.
Diarchy? What's that?
It basically meant dividing government functions. Some areas were transferred to Indian ministers responsible to elected legislatures, while others, the more important ones like finance and law and order, remained under British control.
Sounds complicated and potentially fraught.
It was. The aim was to extend a British style of responsible parliamentary government to India. But this faced huge criticism, especially from some within the Allied Cecil Bloc. They fundamentally question whether the Westminster model, parliamentary government, could actually work in the Indian context.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Quigley mentions Leopold Amory.
A key Milner Group figure, right?
Yes. Amory later admitted, reflecting on failures in places like Palestine and Ireland too, to a kind of constitutional inability not to see the other fellow's point of view. A sort of tunnel vision, perhaps.
That's quite an admission. It sounds like even with what they probably saw as good intentions, their idealism, maybe, their policies didn't always work out as planned.
That's putting it mildly. Quigley is quite critical here. He argues that despite the idealistic, almost utopian basis for their India policy, it led to significant unintended consequences.
Such as?
Well, the core insight is this. Their actions, Quigley argues, broke down the lines of external authority in Indian society faster than any lines of internal self-discipline were being created.
Faster than, okay, so creating a vacuum.
Exactly. Leading to instability, unintended chaos. And one specific decision is highlighted as a major error, the adoption of communal representation.
Communal representation. Separate voting based on religion or community.
Precisely. creating separate electorates for different groups. Now, the intention might have been to protect minority rights, but Quigley calls it a disastrous era, sacrificing the principle of common citizenship for political expediency. And the result? It ultimately weakened the faith of others in the group's principles and tragically deepened the very divisions in society they perhaps hoped to manage.
Wow. Good intentions paving a difficult road. Okay, so their influence stretched across the empire, but they also looked beyond it, didn't they? Post-World War I, the League of Nations. They must have had a specific vision for that.
They certainly did. Grand global ambitions. But their vision for the League was, well, quite specific and maybe surprising to many people today.
How so?
The groups never, ever intended the League to be some kind of superstate.
No world government, no League army.
Absolutely not. No powers of coercion. Its core purpose, in their view, was much more modest. It was meant to be a common clearinghouse for non-contentious business.
Like international postal union stuff?
Sort of, yeah. And a place for consultation. The real goal was simply to delay conflict.
Delay it, how?
By requiring countries to talk for 3 months before resorting to war. A cooling-off period. Not to enforce peace through sanctions or force. Quigley explicitly states the very idea of a league of force was negative there.
So a talking shop, essentially.
A high-level talking shop designed for dialogue and delay, not enforcement. That's a very different picture than many have of the League.
It really is. Okay, so with that view of international relations, how did they see Germany after World War I, given their imperial focus before the war?
It's quite a pivot, actually. After the war, Quigley says the group's animosity towards Germany pretty much vanished.
Vanished. Just like that.
Largely, yes. By 1919, they were already thinking in terms of balance of power again. They wanted to reconstruct Germany, help it become a peaceful democracy.
Why? What was the strategic thinking?
2 main reasons, it seems. To act as a counterweight to what they saw as rising threats, Bolshevism from Russia and French militarism.
French militarism? Interesting.
Yes, they were worried about French dominance on the continent. So, they viewed the Treaty of Versailles as way too harsh on Germany.
Too punitive.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And they actively worked behind the scenes to try and lighten Germany's reparations burden. Group members like Arthur Salter even served as General Secretary of the Reparations Commission.
Actively working to revise the treaty they helped negotiate.
In effect, yes, trying to ease the pressure on Germany. John Dove, another close associate, argued very strongly that French policy, particularly Poincaré occupying the Ruhr Valley.
Right, in 1923.
Exactly. Dove argued that would inevitably lead to the final collapse of democracy in Germany. They saw themselves as trying to save German democracy from French pressure.
This philosophy, then, this idea of reconciling with Germany, building it up, it seems like a straight line to the policy of appeasement in the 1930s.
It does seem to flow directly into it. Quigley is very clear. The group's main publications, the Times and the Round Table, were major platforms promoting appeasement.
Actively pushing it.
Actively. And there's a really stark example. Lord Halifax is meeting with Hitler in November 1937.
Halifax was a key group member, right? An acting foreign secretary then.
Exactly. And the takeaway from that meeting, according to Quigley's analysis of the German records, was deeply unsettling.
How so?
The Germans came away convinced that Britain saw Germany as the main bulwark against communism.
Okay.
And crucially, that Britain was prepared to allow Germany to effectively liquidate Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland.
Liquidate.
That's the word used in the source analysis. If, and this is the key condition, if this could be done without provoking a war, that would involve Britain.
Wow. That's a devastating assessment of British intentions, or at least perceived intentions.
It's a powerful and disturbing revelation, showing a profound misreading of Hitler's ultimate aims, driven perhaps by that anti-communist balance of power thinking.
Were there any dissenting voices? Did anyone within the group see this appeasement policy as disastrous?
Yes, absolutely. This wasn't monolithic. The appeasement policy actually caused major internal splits.
Like who?
Figures like Sir Alfred Zimmern, who we mentioned drifting earlier, he publicly broke with the policy way back in 1925.
That early?
Yes, warning against what he called the steady sabotage of the League of Nations by these policies. And Lord Robert Cecil, a strong League supporter with family ties to the Bloc, also parted ways with the group's appeasement line in 1938.
So there was internal resistance.
There was. And the group itself, or at least its main voice, the Round Table, eventually had its own moment of reckoning.
Oh.
In September 1939, right after the invasion of Poland, Quigley says they published what he calls a magnificent confession of culpability,
A confession.
acknowledging that Hitler's real aim was nothing less than mastery of the world and admitting their own slowness to realize these facts, or at least to act accordingly.
A stark admission, but tragically late.
Very late indeed, a moment of stark, belated self-reflection.
Okay, so if we try to pull all these threads together, looking back at the Milner Group as a whole, what were its core beliefs fundamentally, and how did it actually operate? What was that tension between their sort of high ideals and the practical effects?
Well, at its absolute heart, Quigley argues the group was driven by this really strong emphasis on moral conviction.
Morality again.
Yes, and devotion to duty, freedom under law. They genuinely seem to believe the British Empire was, quote, the supreme moral achievement of man, albeit an unfinished one.
Supreme moral achievement. That's a big claim.
It is. And Milner himself, with his clear distaste for party politics, his focus on administration, social welfare, national unity, imperial federation, Quigley sees him as an early example of what the later theorist James Burnham called the managerial revolution.
The managerial revolution.
Meaning the idea of skilled managers, experts operating behind the scenes, guiding things, perhaps seeing themselves as above the messy fray of public politics.
Right. The technocrats, the planners.
Kind of like that, yeah. An elite guiding force.
But this vision, however idealistic or managerial, it clearly had massive blind spots, didn't it?
Critically, yes. And here's a really crucial takeaway from Quigley's critique. Despite all the high ideals, the group showed a consistent neglect, even scorn, for economic considerations.
Scorn for economics. But they had financiers involved, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like Brand.
They did. But even their supposed economic experts, like Brand and Hitchens, held views deeply rooted in, like, late 19th century international banking.
Yeah.
Classical liberal economics.
So things like the gold standard, balanced budgets.
Exactly. Policies they clung to even after World War I. And Quigley argues these policies directly led to massive problems in Britain. Unemployment, depression, and ruination of the export trade.
So their economic ideology was out of step with reality.
That's the argument. It shows how even brilliant people can be blinded by dogma, failing to see the practical, real-world consequences.
And their methods. This preference for working with elites, influencing the important people, how did that play out in practice?
Their core strategy, as we touched on, was influencing that small group of important people, believing that they could then influence wider and wider circles, not mass propaganda.
Top-down influence.
Exactly. That was the theory behind things like the Rhodes scholarships, identify and cultivate future leaders. It was behind the Round Table, the RIA, their efforts to control key parts of Oxford, influence the influencers.
And you mentioned that technique of thinking aloud.
Yes, using their publications to float ideas, often anonymously. If an idea met strong resistance, it could be quietly dropped or denied, allowing them to test reactions without risking personal prestige or political capital. Very strategic.
So wrapping this up, what were the ultimate critiques? According to Quigley's deep dive, what were the fundamental flaws in their approach?
Despite the high ideals, Quigley levels some pretty serious criticisms. Things like a lack of perspective in critical moments, a failure to use intelligence and common sense. Sounds harsh, but refers to that blindness to consequences. And a tendency to place power and influence into hands chosen by friendship rather than merit.
The network aspect, sometimes trumping competence.
The old boys network problem.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
They were often, he says, oblivious to the consequences of their actions, and crucially, ignorant of the point of view of persons in other countries or of persons in other classes.
That lack of perspective again.
Exactly. And Quigley concludes, particularly regarding those idealistic, almost utopian policies like in India, that they ultimately broke down the lines of external authority faster than any lines of internal self-discipline were being created.
Leading to
Results exactly contrary to the desires of the Milner Group. A tragic irony in many ways.
Oh, wow. This deep dive has definitely shown us an incredibly powerful, deeply interconnected network, operating for decades, shaping huge global events, often, right behind the curtain, with intentions that were, well, complex, sometimes idealistic, sometimes, as we've seen, deeply flawed. It really does underline how a relatively small, tightly knit group, if it leverages the right institutions, academia, media, political connections, can exert absolutely immense influence.
Yeah.
Even when dealing with conflicting motives internally or working with imperfect information, their impact was just undeniable. It really shows how power doesn't always operate where we typically look for it.
Absolutely. So, as you listening reflect on all this intricate history, here's something to maybe chew on. In our own age, an age of just unprecedented information flow, what kind of invisible threads of influence might still be operating behind the headlines, behind the news feeds, shaping how we understand the world, shaping the policies that govern
That's
us?
a really important question.
And maybe more fundamentally, how can we ensure that the ideals we champion, whatever they are genuinely informed, informed by truly diverse perspectives, by rigorous common sense, so that even our best intentions don't accidentally lead us down paths with unintended and sometimes disastrous outcomes?
A challenge for any time, really.
Definitely something to think about.